I'll briefly introduce each one of you. And again, it's not going to be easy to be brief since you're all doing lots of excellent work, but I'll try with Michelle. So Michelle is an associate professor in biomedical engineering at Wayne State University, and she's been working in the field for more than 20 years, I think about 25 years, specifically focusing on methods to prevent and intervene in preterm birth. Then on the panel, we have Adrienne Scott. Adrienne is assistant professor of the University of Notre Dame. What's interesting is that Adrienne used to be Michelle's postdoc, and she's now got an independent position, University of Notre Dame, where she's focusing on integrating engineering principles with medicine, focusing on maternal and infant health. And last but not least, we have Bianca in the panel. Bianca is a researcher in AI for women's health at Amsterdam UMC, and her work is about applying computer science and AI in gynecology. I tried my best to be short, but again, I could have spent hours just talking about your introduction. Welcome everyone again to those who have just joined. So I will share the panel together with Christine. If you haven't opened the link yet, there is the slide on the chat that you can click on and submit your questions or vote other people's questions. I will start with the first question, which is, what does a typical week look like for you? How much of your time is spent doing what? So just general question. And I'll ask Michelle to start with this, if that's okay with you.
Yep. So right now I am teaching my engineering for women's health course. And so that is on Monday evenings. And that means that I basically spend all day Monday doing my teaching prep, my grading, my office hours, all of that kind of stuff, and really just dedicate my Mondays to teaching. And that's normally because it's an evening class, sort of a 12-hour day, but that's okay because then that's all of my teaching for the week done in one day. Then the rest of the week I'm basically wearing all of the other hats that I wear, which includes a lot of things that are typical for a university professor, obviously managing my own research and everything like that. But because of my roles in trying to expand this field and to get this field kind of organized, I'm often also doing things like, we're just setting up a special interest group in the Biomedical Engineering Society for engineering and women's health. And so I'm organizing things for that. So I do a lot of that kind of stuff. And then I try a day a week to also spend just writing. And so it's like every week it differs because, there's different appointments, different events, different seminars. Last week I was traveling, giving a seminar at another institution. So things change a lot, but I would say that that's kind of my typical week is a day spent teaching, hopefully a day spent writing, and then 3 days spent kind of wearing all of the other hats.
Yeah, it can be quite challenging actually making sure that everything fits within the same week. But yeah, that's one of the challenges. Thank you, Michelle. Adrienne, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. I'm actually doing this faculty success program right now where they have us track our time and block out everything that we need to do in a week. And they always say that everything you want to do is never going to fit. And so there are a lot of hats I feel like there to wear in an academic position. But I'd say on a typical week, most of my time is probably spent teaching. I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday, generally, and there's a good amount of prep that goes into, teaching for the first time, making homeworks, making lecture slides, and preparing for the class in general. But outside of that, managing my research lab and meeting with my students is also a highlight of the week. And sort of just I'm building up my lab right now, so a lot of organization, a lot of admin work to get the lab up and running in terms of getting my protocols all squared away and potentially meeting with collaborators and a lot of sort of building to lay the foundation for my research lab. And outside of that, there's fun opportunities like this. Like Michelle said, I think every week is different. Last week, I had the opportunity to present at the local library about women's health. And this week I get to join this panel, which is awesome. So there's always something new.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Adriana. I think that captures how hard we're trying to make everything fit within the week, and doesn't matter how hard we try, we never succeed. Thank you. Bianca.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, I'm currently on a research position, so I actually don't have teaching requirements, which is quite nice. I think it makes it more manageable as well. I am actually supervising PhD students, master students, so that's also a big chunk of my time, but I don't have classes that I have to teach. Another big part of my work is to do with research grants. So I've always got a grant, at least one, maybe sometimes two or three ongoing. And at the moment, we are finalizing one grant, which included finding a small and medium enterprise from the Netherlands. So I spent a lot of time Googling companies and getting in touch with them. So that was the last few days. So I fully agree with what has been said. Like, actually, no week is the same. It's always changing, but I always try to be doing a bit of everything, I think. I must emphasize that, at least in my position, there's a lot of admin as well. I think way more than I expected, because when I was doing my PhD, so I did my PhD in computer science and I ended my PhD about 2 years ago now. And I think I didn't realize quite how much like admin work goes in the background, because back then, my priority was really my PhD research. Was now, like, for each PhD student that I'm supervising, there's so much admin work to be done in the background. So just to give you an example, at the moment, I'm fighting to get my future or incoming research assistant a contract through HR, and it takes so much time, to just go back and forth with HR and in general, just like liaising with everybody. But on the side, I'm also really involved in such events as today. I'm also always trying my best to answer every single request for student projects. So this morning I was interviewed for a student project. For example, last week I took 2 hours to join a workshop, which was super interesting. But yeah, so that also takes some time. And overall, I'd say that the writing is probably the one that I'm struggling to find the most time for, because it takes more brain effort. So I need more time. But at the moment, I'm writing abstracts for conferences. So these are, I think, easier to write, a little bit quicker. So yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Thank you, Bianca. That was quite a large summary of lots of things still to do, even if you're not teaching. So that's quite busy week. I'll pass this to Christine, who's going to ask the next question.
Yeah, thank you all so much. So the next question that we'll cover is, so what are the main challenges or opportunities you've seen in your career in AI for women's health? And maybe we'll start with Bianca this time. I know you just spoke, but
Okay, so I'll talk about my experience. I think for me, so I'm as Annalisa mentioned, I'm focusing primarily on gynecology and gynecological imagery. For me, the main challenge when I started was, number one, funding, because I was the first employee of my department to focus on AI. So in fact, all of my colleagues, I think, are either gynecologists or somehow medical professionals, which I'm not. And we started from scratch. So we really had to, get feasibility studies out, get some initial funding, grants, etc. That took a very long time. I'm very lucky and grateful that we did get a grant, and a big grant, and then small grants as well. But it took about a year, and during that time, I really didn't have neither data nor the space to actually do research. And when you're starting as a young professional in this space, I think this is a big risk, right? Because you're essentially not publishing for that period of time, or not as much as you should. So that was a big challenge, not just for me individually for my career, but also for, I think, the field in general. And then, of course, that relating to that, one of the main challenges is also data, the lack of data. This is a theme that I think we'll discuss a lot in this community. But yeah, in my case, there wasn't really much open source data I could really use. Therefore, we had to build our own data sets. But as I mentioned, when I joined, that was just not available, at least not in a format that was usable for AI research. So one of the main things I did, which again is background work and isn't necessarily valued because I'm not going to probably publish about it, is set up a data collection pipeline that was standardized and kind of semi-automated in the way that I could have enough data for my work. And again, that took a year. It took so long. And these are the kind of thing that, I don't think it's necessarily research, but it is necessary because these are the infrastructures that then me and the students I'm working with kind of rely on in order to do our work. So yeah, in a way, I wish it was already in place when I started, but it wasn't. So I think you just have to deal with it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. I think we'll probably talk a lot about the data availability issues and just how long it takes for research to kind of get started to the point where you can even do it. So I think that that's a huge thing in women's health that we'll probably everyone will cover as well. But we'll move to Adrian next.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was going to say as well, in terms of the challenges, and I might even steal some of Michelle's thunder here, I'm not sure. But I think that data collection is really key. Getting data out as available to the community as open source, I think is also extremely important. We want to be able to have reproducible experiments and reproducible work. And so sharing the data, I think, is critical, as well as figuring out ways to harmonize data across different groups and research research challenges, I think, is important. We when working with Michelle, I had the opportunity to work on a grant that was funded through Welcome Leap. And one of the challenges that we had in this Welcome Leap project is we wanted to collect standardized, harmonized data across many different research groups. And so similar to Bianca, setting up that pipeline is really challenging. To set up a pipeline that's the same at every institute, that can be collected in similar ways, so you have the exact same variables, and that can be a big challenge. We did our collection through REDCap and tried to standardize it that way, but there's many different systems that makes that challenging. But hopefully that data set eventually can be available to the public, because I think making it accessible is really important as well. And then I think, Bianca, you also hinted to this, is images, medical images, having access to medical images that are standardized as well, is also critical. Being in the field of maternal health, a lot of imaging is done through ultrasound, and I think Michelle sometimes tells the story a lot, where when we started off our project with collecting ultrasounds, we were so surprised as biomedical engineers that the ultrasounds weren't really saved. So the clinicians would take the ultrasounds, they take their measurements that they needed in utero, but we wouldn't actually get a saved image from that we could analyze and further process in our pipeline. And so that's that challenge of sort of setting up the infrastructure to save those images and then transfer them to our research group is something that you might not have to encounter if you're taking an MRI of the brain, for example. So yeah, I think not to echo too much of what Bianca said, but data is a huge challenge in terms of accessibility and setting up the pipelines.
Thanks so much, Adrian. I think that makes so much sense, that these are the things that we all kind of struggle with in different ways, and that these are also very sort of, specific to women's health as well, some of these challenges. And I think that when you speak to other researchers, they may not necessarily be aware of these kind of basic challenges to deal with, like saving data or having data available. So I think that, yeah, that's really useful as well. So we'll move to Michelle next.
Yeah, so I want to take the big picture view of this. So I think one of the things that has been touched on already, but I want to reinforce the point, is that historically, at least in the United States, and I can't speak generally, but medical imaging for women's health, for OB/GYN, has been separate from the rest of medical imaging. So radiology has had its own pipelines, and so there are databases of images available if you want to look at liver cancer or lungs post COVID or things like that. That's all part of the radiology pipeline because of the fact that women's health is often done by ultrasound in clinic by doctors who are OBGYNs, not radiologists. They do not necessarily have the same pipeline, and therefore they don't necessarily have the same methods for saving the images, for archiving the images. So there's challenges associated with that I think are really big. But the other thing that I want to say is, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, is that it's always important to keep the broad view of things. And so even though it's really difficult setting things up for the first time, and yes, you may spend a year or 2 years doing that, once you learn how to do things, it's always easier to do the second time, and it's easier to do the next time. And so there is a learning curve. And I think if there was any piece of advice that I would give to younger people, it's to remember that you have to kind of integrate over a 5 year timeline when you look at your progress and your results. And it's really hard to do that, especially in the current funding environment. People are always looking for progress, and they're looking for publications, and they're looking for outputs on a very short time scale. But it's only when you go back and look at your career integrated over a longer timeline that you see all of these different things. And so I think that's something that is, as the older person here who's trying to be the voice of experience, don't get discouraged when you're doing these things. And this is where I think mentorship is extremely important. And Bianca and I have had this discussion many times that, you really have to find mentors who are older, who are more experienced, who can encourage you and help you when you get to the end of a week or the end of a month or even the end of a year and you say, what do I have to show for all of this? Yes, you have to be strategic with how you spend your time and think about things that you can be doing to, advance a review paper if you don't have new data yet because you're busy setting up a pipeline, something like that. But, we get judged integrated over much longer time frames than just what we do in a given week or month or even year. The other thing that I want to bring up that's really important in this space in particular is data privacy. And that's something that whenever we talk to patient groups, when we talk to prospective mothers, they're very concerned, especially as women, especially given political climates that vary a great deal across the world. They're very concerned about their data privacy. And so, from the research perspective, we're really concerned about access to data and access to images and everything. But we have to always be very sensitive to the fact that, especially when it comes to people's reproductive health, that's a very sensitive and personal topic to women. And so we need to make sure that we are building the layers of that privacy into everything we do. And that is something that we don't treat as an afterthought, but as a primary focus of what we're doing. And so that's something that I think, especially when we communicate with the general public, when we talk about these sorts of topics, it's like there's a balance, right? There's a balance between we want access to the most data possible, but we also have to be extremely sensitive to dealing with women's feelings about their personal, private, reproductive data in particular. And so I think, that's just something that has to be an under the hood kind of constant reminder to all of us who work in this field that this data is a little bit more sensitive than some other aspect of data. All health data is very private and very personal, but I think reproductive health data is kind of next level on that.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, I think those are really important points to be brought up. And I think especially talking about, the different levels of privacy that are needed in women's health, the different levels of pressures that are on women's health as well, is something that we really need to be thinking about all the time. And also having to explain to people a lot as well when they think that kind of the same protocols or the same things can be put in place for women's health. And it's just not true. So thank you. That's super helpful. So I'll turn it back over to Annalisa for the next question.
Thank you, Kristen. So with the next couple of questions that we have on the slide, we're going back to where you started. And The next question is asking, for those starting out, it is better to be an AI generalist first or dive straight into a niche like femtech? So this is more for a kind of advice that you will give to a new person that's starting out now. And we will start with you, Adrienne, if that's okay, and we'll go back.
Yeah, sounds great. I don't think that there is one path. I think that if you start as an AI generalist, then you're gonna have to find your expertise in the area that you want to look into in women's health. And I think at that point, mentorship, like Michelle said, is really important to find mentors who can guide you. And reading a lot in the literature, reading broadly, reading more specifically. Um, and so I think that there's not one path to start out. Each person can be individually successful. And so you just have to find what your strengths and what your weaknesses are and fill those weaknesses. And I think that I'm interested in machine learning and AI, but that's not my traditional training and background. And so if I'm pursuing those areas in research, I need to do a lot more work and put a lot more effort into those areas. And so that would be my advice.
Thank you, Adrienne. I think you touched a really important point. That's follow what you're passionate about. Because if you do that, probably everything else will work out one way or the other. That's really important. Thank you, Adrienne. Bianca, I'll go to you next, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I fully agree with you, Adrian. And the other thing I wanted to maybe raise is that, at least in my experience, women's health, AI for women's health is highly, highly interdisciplinary. Sorry, I can't say that word, interdisciplinary, which means that essentially you need a lot of different skills. And that means you need a lot of different people to get to where you want to arrive. And that's why I think really, like you said, Adrian, like everyone can contribute. So for me, there's no right or wrong way of doing it. Also, bear in mind that none of us, I think I'm right saying that none of us have had a specific training in AI for women's health. We just did it, right? So, and there's unfortunately there's still a lack in training in that space actually. But I think essentially whatever are your interests, for example, I was doing my PhD in computer science, these can be then applied to the field. And just to give you an example, the students that are working with me at the moment, half of them are medical students. And to be fair, had zero AI skills prior to working together, but they were interested. And then I teamed them up with other students who are either AI master students or other students who have more of a technical background, and that's how you learn, right? So I think not you shouldn't base everything on your degree learning, but the things you're learning from your degree, but also think about peer learning opportunities. We talked about mentorship already, but also any type of like side project that you could be doing. So I think people often underestimate the power of side projects. Like I just want to like give you an example. This group, the AI for Women's Health group, started as a side project during my PhD, and now we're here. So like I think the power of doing these kind of things that are interesting to you, and then step by step things lead you somewhere. And I think that's well, at least that's how I did it, and I think I would say most people in this space have done that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Bianca, especially because the training, we can't, of course, expect that whatever we're studying now or whatever students are studying now at university or we're teaching them will be the same thing that's going to be out there in 2 years or 3 years once they graduate. So I think what we can do, the best we can do as lecturers and as professors, we can teach them the basics, and then it's down to each single individual then to just navigate and keep up with the pace of AI expansion. Thanks again, Bianca, for that. Michelle, would you like to add anything else on this?
I do. And in fact, I want to build on what Bianca said, because all of my research in obstetrics, which has been my primary focus, that started as a side track project for me when I was doing a PhD on bone and cartilage. And so we're talking about, we're back in the 90s now, and I was doing something that would have been a traditional bioengineering project. And I ended up working with an obstetrician, and that basically just changed my entire direction. And then going back to the fact that this is interdisciplinary being so important. I mean, one of the things that I think of myself as a biomedical engineer is I'm sitting in the middle. And in fact, the project that Adrian and I worked on together, the other two PIs, one was a medical doctor and an ultrasound expert, and the other one was a computer science professor. And so I'm the one in the middle. They don't speak the same language, okay? They do not speak the same language, but I'm the one in the middle who's joining them two together. And therefore, I have to be the translator, which means I have to speak enough of both of their languages in order to make this work. And that is my role as a person who works in an interdisciplinary field, is to get enough knowledge to be dangerous. I'm not going to have the computer science and AI knowledge of my computer science professor, nor am I going to have the clinical knowledge of my obstetrician colleague, but I'm going to be able to understand what both of them are saying. And the only way that you get to that is to read. And I just cannot emphasize that enough. And I'm sort of notorious for reading every book that comes out about pregnancy. Like every book on Amazon is about pregnancy is something that I read, because I just want to soak up knowledge and be able to have those conversations. And the same thing's true on the AI side. When I got into this and started realizing I wanted to do this, I actually did take a class in machine learning. So I actually did register for some classes and forced myself to update my programming skills to the 2020, since my programming was largely in the 90s, and things have changed a lot. So I think that's always be willing to grow and learn, and don't hesitate. There are classes out there that you can take. If you work in a university environment, you don't have to even formally register to sit in to, get the lecture materials to read. And I think one of the things that I would say is the most important thing that I ever was taught was that the degree of Doctor of Philosophy is not specific to a subject. Just because you did your Doctor of Philosophy degree in computer science, or in my case, it was in biophysics, it wasn't even in engineering. That doesn't mean that you're restricted to the field that you were studying, because a Doctor of Philosophy is a general field. And in fact, what you're learning as a PhD student is how to learn, such that you can then pivot your career to go into a totally new direction, because you've learned how to formulate hypotheses, how to, do background research, how to develop relationships with people. And that interdisciplinary aspect of this means that those colleague relationships are one of the most important things that you develop. And so getting enough background to be able to speak the languages of the different people that you work with, and then finding the right people, the right kind of open-minded colleague in computer science, and the right, kind of doctor who really is passionate about research and wants to do something new and interesting and different, even though it's new and interesting and different, that's really key to all of this.
Yeah, fully agree with you, Michelle. And this brings us back to the actual question: is it better to be a generalist AI or a specific field? I think, again, it all depends on what you are good at. So it's just what your main interest, what your passion is about. So, because you can be an AI generalist and then work across different sectors, or you can specialize if that's what you passionate about. You can specialize in a specific field. Thanks a lot for sharing those insights. That was really great. I'll pass this back to Christine, who's going to ask the next question.
Yeah, thank you all. So our next question is, if you could speak to your younger self just starting out your career, what would you tell her? So we'll start out with Michelle this time.
Well, I think I already answered this a little bit, which is read everything. I mean, I think that's probably some of my best advice. And also just keep an open mind. I think there's a risk to trying to do too much in this field, but at the same time, you kind of have to try a lot of different things because you don't know which one's going to go. And so I think, that means that you have to stay open-minded and you have to explore lots of different opportunities, because in research, there are always going to be projects that don't go anywhere. There are always going to be things that you think are great ideas that don't actually go somewhere. The project that you think is perfect but doesn't get funded, but then something else does. And so I think just keeping that open mind is extremely important, and just never stop learning. Just keep reading, keep reading, keep reading.
Thanks. That's really helpful. So we'll go to Adrienne next.
I think it's just sort of similar to being open-minded, but I think we get a lot of advice to protect our time and say no a lot. But I think I might counteract that and say, I think it is important sometimes to say yes to opportunities because you really don't know where they're gonna end up. And a lot of times they just open up new doors. I think especially as young faculty, been given a lot of the advice of whether or not if this specific task is going to help you get tenure, then you should say yes. And if this is not going to help you get tenure, then you should seriously consider if it's like worth your time, basically. But yeah, I don't want to counteract that advice for for most people out there, but I do think that it's important to reflect on what brings you joy, and say yes to opportunities because oftentimes they just lead to more opportunities. And I think just being flexible and also pursuing what you feel passionate about, I think it can't be overemphasized.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, actually, Adrian. I think that that's something that you'll find in women's health, especially because you need to kind of make so many different connections and need to work with people from so many different disciplines that actually just taking on as many opportunities as you can is really useful. And it helps you learn a lot more. It helps kind of get you to other opportunities, or like we were discussing at the beginning of this call, like connecting more people that can then work with each other as well. So I think that that's actually a huge way that the women's health kind of space works. And I think it kind of does contradict some of that advice that you get from people in other fields. And you do have to explain that a little bit. You're like, well, this is why I'm taking on so much. But I think it's actually really great advice. It's kind of the opposite of what you're often told. So thank you for bringing that up. And then we'll go to Bianca next.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I won't repeat what has been said because I agree. I just wanted to share my experience. So I'm thinking about me a couple of years ago when I was, doing my PhD, especially at the start. And I should mention it was COVID time, so it was a very specific period of time, and I don't think it's very representative. But I think if I was, talking to myself back then, I would say that I would have perhaps spent more time engaging in kind of conferences, talks, and things like that, that not only bring you knowledge about perhaps topics that are not super central to your current research, but could be related or could give you, that spark of inspiration or that connection that is then going to lead to another project or something like that, but also the network. I think what I was really missing when I started off was this community, actually. And I'm glad that I, invested time into building it, but I think everyone can do that at their own scale. It doesn't have to be like a single person doing everything. Like I think every single one of us could and should do that. I also think that because we've touched upon the fact that it's such an interdisciplinary field, I genuinely believe that, big changes in this and breakthroughs in this space are not going to come from a single person. They're most likely going to come from like a group of people that are working really well together. And that can start as early as your PhD or master's degree, in fact. I don't think you have to wait until you have a specific position or a specific, level of experience or seniority. And I think this is probably one of the biggest, maybe piece of advice that I would give to younger me is to really look out for these opportunities to meet people, learn from other people. And I mentioned it earlier, but I think peer learning is underrated. I think peer learning is great, and I think especially when you're still a student, your job is to learn. I think that's the most important thing. You need to really invest in building your skill set, and especially afterwards, I think, and I'm sure Michelle and Adrian, will agree, but you have less time to like take up that like core class or once you're really I guess in a more senior position, or even me, I'm not in a senior position, but I have so much stuff to do. It's really hard to be like learning these new skills. So what I actually do, and this is not advice for like younger people, but when my students are taking a class which I think is cool, I ask their notes and then I read them because I don't have time to attend the class. But then I look at the slides and then maybe one evening I'll just sit down for a few hours and read everything. And that's kind of not as efficient, I suppose, but like it's still a way of for me to update my knowledge and like learn new things. So yeah, keep learning. That's probably the like bottom line message. Yeah.
Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, I think that's also great advice. And I think it's great advice too for any students in the room to maybe wanting to look at, different skills that they want to build. Like I think Michelle was saying this earlier, any different skills you want to build, any new topics that you want to learn, you want to go into women's health, but you're in a degree that isn't really covering it. If you have a university where you can audit a course or go to a lecture or something like that, do it because you'll learn so much just by sitting and reading. So I think that's really, really great advice from everybody. And then I'll throw this back to Annalisa for the next question.
Thank you, Kristen. I just want to mention if anyone else in the room, we're of course using the Slido, but if anyone in the room has got any questions they want to ask themselves, feel free to put your hands up and of course you can unmute yourself and ask the question just directly to the panelist. The next question that it's in the Slido is about challenges and opportunities. And specifically, they're asking what are the main challenges or opportunities that you've seen in your career in AI for women's health. So if you'd like to probably highlight both the challenges but as well as the opportunities. And I'll leave this open to any of you three who would like to jump in first. So just feel free to jump in.
I'm going to jump in because I want to build on this question to something that the other two panelists were just discussing. Just remembering that this is a new field. Everything's an opportunity. And actually, I think some of what Adrian was saying about advice that you're given, people who are giving advice are usually giving advice in the context of a field that already exists. Whereas this is a new field, and women's health research is decades behind other areas of medicine. And that's something that I think is still shocking to me, and that I don't think a lot of my colleagues really understand. And that goes, that makes it a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. Every time I try to get a paper published, it's a challenge and an opportunity because it's a challenge if the reviewers are reviewers coming from a more traditional field and they look at what I've done and they say, oh, well, this is really simple and straightforward. And it's like, yes, but it's never been done before because this is a new field. However, it's really easy to get dissuaded by that. However, then you're the first person to write a paper in that field. And that means that in the future, looking at taking the long view, you might end up with a very well-cited paper because you were the first one to publish in that area. So I think the fact that this is a new field makes it such a challenge and an opportunity simultaneously. And it's actually really impossible to separate those two things out. The opportunity part of it keeps me excited all the time. The challenge makes me pull my hair out. One of my earliest publications in this field was rejected twice by two different journals before it was accepted for publication with no changes the third time. It's a random crapshoot. That is not something that other people in more established and more traditional fields find. However, they might be doing much more incremental work, whereas we're taking a field that didn't exist before and doing something completely novel for the first time. And so I think the biggest challenge is that this new field creates that simultaneous opportunity and challenge, and you have to keep perspective. And I think people have mentioned on this call already the joy of what we do and the importance of it. And at the end of the day, especially for me, working in obstetrics, working in maternal health, at the end of the day, I remember that I'm doing this for the mothers and the babies. I remember that I'm doing this because I want to change people's lives. And I take time out of my busy schedule to talk to women who have lost a child in stillbirth, or women who have had a really horrible experience with the medical establishment accomplishment, because you have to keep that perspective of why we're doing this when the challenges get to be really difficult, and when you're doing something new and different, and your colleagues who are doing something far more traditional don't understand that. And it just adds to the excess challenge of this, that most of us doing women's health also happen to be women. I went through my bachelor's, master's, and PhD without ever having a female engineering professor. And so things have changed very rapidly in that area in the last 30 years. But that's how recently that's happened. That's over the course of my career. And I still would consider myself mid-career. So there are challenges on top of challenges in that area, working as a woman in a field that 30 years ago had very few women, and then specifically working in women's health on top of that. So I'll stop with that. But I think, those challenges and opportunities are just so closely entwined in this field. And that's something that is both a blessing and a curse. And we just have to keep perspective on that.
I think that that's a really key point of the entire discussion. Like starting to actually seeing those challenges or opportunities, because it's true that's a challenging field, but we can actually look at those challenges from a different perspective and see, okay, this is where the gap is, this is where the problem is, and that's what I'm gonna jump in to help fixing that. That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Adrian, Bianca, do you want to add anything on top of these? Michelle, your answer was perfect, so there was nothing.
Yeah, I think it's just echoing that, like in terms of also just fundamental research and fundamental basic science questions. It's like there's so much that we don't know. Oftentimes I want to write a proposal to do this one thing, but then I realize I need some basic science information that doesn't exist already. And then it's like, okay, well, do I write that proposal or what do I do first? And so I think, yeah, there are challenges because there's just not basic foundational research done to answer some questions that we need to build off of, that would already be answered in many different fields. But then that means that there's a lot of opportunities to make a large impact, which is, I think, just very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, fully agree with that, Adrian. Yeah, that's probably what makes us, all of us being here, just probably because we start realizing that out of those challenges there are opportunities but it's not just on the personal level, there's opportunities to bring the field forward and help women in women's health. Sorry, Bianca, do you want to add anything else, or shall I?
No, I was just going to say, well, you've said everything, but I think because of that situation, I actually found that in my position as a junior researcher, I've received a lot of help from the community as well. And I think that comes from the fact that people in this space realize and recognize how hard it is to start in. And so as a result, I also think that the field itself is perhaps more considerate or more friendly towards younger junior researchers, which is not necessarily the case in like more competitive areas, I guess. So I do think that, yeah, we talked about a lot of the challenges, but I also do think that there are people, resources, and communities which you can turn to then get some help or knowledge or skills. So in that sense, I do think it's a quite welcoming and also just pleasant environment to work with, to work in. That being said, I also I wanted to jump on the topic of women being underrepresented. I do think this is still an issue. I think we're far from being completely done with that historical log of overly men-dominated research, and that does mean that for example, a lot of my work is really advocating for patients to be involved and included in research, and there's quite a lot of more, let's say, traditional clinical research that doesn't necessarily understand the purpose of doing that, and or like some of my colleagues, we had really interesting conversations where I was like, I don't understand why you don't understand, you know. So I think that also means that you need to tread carefully, because I think Michelle pointed out that some people are more interested in incremental research that is more maybe traditional, but it's always going to be seen as challenging, sometimes even threatening, to be doing something that is quite different. And whilst those who are doing that are very, I think, supportive, you can also be meeting people who really don't understand what you're doing this and what's the value of it. So yeah, I think this is more like people skills rather than actual technical AI skills. But this is definitely something I've been trying to work on lately, like understanding who's going to be, you know, supportive in my work. Yeah.
I think that's really important, Bianca. I think this is something that you're really good at, in just taking out the bringing the message out there, and making sure that the people from the community, but also the people you work with, particular people that are not from the field, really understand the value of the work that you are doing and the entire community is doing. So thanks a lot for that, for trying to have that difficult conversation at the beginning. I'll give this back to Kristen for the next question then.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question we have is, what advice do you have for an early career researcher on framing their AI research proposals to appeal to grant bodies while still staying true to the needs of female patients? So we could start with whoever wants to start on this one.
I can jump in, because that's been part of a lot of my work in the last year. And I'm sure Michelle and Adrian have also a lot to say about this as well. So in my experience, the only grants that were successful were the ones who were already dedicated to women's health funding. So that means that basically the only people that really wanted to invest money in our work were people who had already committed to provide that funding for women's health issues. And I do think that makes a big difference. So to give you an example, I applied for about, I think, 15 grants last year of different sizes. Some were national, some were European, some were international, some were local grants. And in the end, we got a national Dutch grant that is the first year that it's ever been awarded, and it's a women-specific grant. We also got a Amsterdam Reproduction and Development Grant, a Cambridge Reproduction Grant as well. So all these grants were already, awarded by people who are allies to the cause, if I may say. And then the other ones, which were more like general grants, we didn't convince the reviewers, sometimes by very, it takes that much little, or one person not to like your project to just not get the funding. But I do think this is probably something that other people have also come across in the field. So yeah, I guess my main advice is pick the grants that you're most likely, talking to people who are already aware of the issues. So that was one thing. The other thing is I also think that national grants in general are probably easier than those big international grants, especially if you're starting off, and that was our case because our group was new. So, we didn't have that much data or that many publications to back up our proposals. And I think that's also one of the, chicken and egg problem, that you're asking for money, but you don't have the preliminary. We did have a few, but really few papers to back up what we're doing. So yeah, I think that was the strategy that worked for us, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really helpful information too, from someone that's been going through a lot of different grant applications. And I think that, yeah, just different types of grants in different countries, the landscapes change frequently. So I think there's a lot of things that go into that as well. So I'll ask Adrian next, if you have anything to add. Yeah.
I think I'm still trying to figure this out, but I think that because, so I think that it is really important to seek out those grants that are specific towards women's health, like Bianca said, because I think that one of the reasons why they are so successful is because the people who are reading the grants have the background and the knowledge that they need to understand what the importance of the work. And so, with that being said, in terms of if you're applying to more general funding, I think providing more background than you think is necessary is probably very important. And providing more motivation than you think is necessary is important because that will frame the work and provide the background that your viewers might not know. And so something that might seem obvious for you won't seem obvious to other researchers in the field because they just haven't potentially heard of the issue or the problem. And so I think background motivation, answering why this work is important, why you should fund it. Michelle will always tell her researchers, her trainees in the group to answer the Heilemeyer questions. And so when you're writing your grant, you can look up these questions of why you think you should fund the work, what the gap in the field is, and why it's important in general to pursue this research. And so framing is probably more important than ever in terms of the writing grants in this space. Yeah, I think I'll end with that.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful and really useful as well about, yeah, just structuring them really well and structuring the problem and the background. And again, this is something too where maybe it's women's health specific, where you're having to provide more background. You're having to, you know, defend it and justify things a little bit more than everybody else does. And that's when you kind of have to listen to people within women's health that tell you these things about grants rather than listening to, you know, people from different, you know, backgrounds and disciplines. So I think that's really, really useful. So Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I'm going to build off what Adrienne said because she's right. I do have an obsession with the Heilmeyer questions. For those who aren't familiar with this is basically something that came out of the former director of DARPA. So a lot of the current research funding in the UK, in the US, are these DARPA model kind of projects, so including Welcome Leap, which we were a part of. And the beginning of it is really, I think, the key, and I think it applies equally to papers you write and proposals, which is what is the problem you're trying to solve? Explain it to a layman in no jargon. Why has it not been solved before? And what is your new idea that is going to solve it now? And I think, you know, whenever I sit down to write a paper or to write a proposal, I start with those three questions, and I start by trying to think of it in the context of an elevator pitch. Can I explain what I'm trying to do to a member of the scientifically literate but general public in the time it takes to ride to the 10th floor in an elevator? And I think that's the thing that we really have trouble with as researchers, because we are obsessively worried about the details, and we're thinking about, you know, which type of machine learning model are we going to use for this application? And that is not the thing that's going to convince someone about the details. Yes, we have to know those things and we have to specify those things in a paper or in a proposal, but we have to lay out that basic elevator pitch. And so I think that's really the way to think about this is, you know, what are you trying to do? Why hasn't it been done before? Why are you going to succeed now? If you can't explain that about what you're doing, then you're not doing a very good job of setting up that background. And so that is where I start with everything. And I think in women's health, especially, and in an area like AI and women's health, where it's, you know, it's not just new, it's kind of new on two sides of the question. Excuse both the women's health side and the AI side, you have to do that even better. And so I think that's really, really important to do, to set up that basic premise and to make sure that you've clearly identified the gap, identified why it hasn't been solved before, and why you are going to be able to solve it now. And thank you very much to Emma, who just put the link to the Heilmeyer questions in the chat for those who are young and embarking on a career in this field. That is always a great place to start. And Adrian knows this is the thing that I mention to my trainees over and over and over again. And when they give me something to read and I say, did you start with the Heilmeier questions? Because that's where I start. I have a document called Heilmeier questions, and every single time I start, that is where I begin with the can I answer those basic questions about what I'm trying to propose every single time. They probably get tired of me mentioning it, but then again, maybe they don't. Maybe the fact that Adrian mentioned it now that she's in her new career and she's still thinking about this, maybe it has actually been a useful exercise.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's incredibly helpful. And I think that is a really great thing for people to be able to kind of see something structural that they can use and refer back to in everything that they're using. So thank you so much for sending that. I think it's going to be really useful for everybody. So I'll throw it back to Annalisa. I don't know if we have time for one more question, but.
What I was thinking, I mean, we do have lots of questions, and I'm sure Michelle, Adrian, and Bianca will not mind being contacted directly. So if your question hasn't been answered today, feel free to just drop them an email with your queries or questions. And I just want to finish with one quick question, which is, what advice would you give to an ECR in the room that wants to start in this field around AI for women's health? Just one short sentence to what would you suggest them doing? The question asks about which journals to read, which community to join, anything that you think would be valuable. Michelle, I'll start from you and then I'll go Michelle, Jean, and Bianca.
I think that the key thing I would get across is there's no wrong answer to this question, right? There's no special magical conference or magical journal that you're going to read or go to that's going to make the perfect career. This is all about the fact that we're all different. We're all researchers who are different. We come from different backgrounds. We have different baseline knowledge. We have different baseline experiences. And so I think there is no right answer to that question. And that's great because that means that the opportunities are there for everyone. And so you can set your own path. You can go to conferences if you want to, be the one to be the groundbreaker and to set up a new symposium on some topic. You can do that. The world is your oyster. And as long as you don't get discouraged, that's, I think, the key thing is just to not worry too much about the details, about the magic thing that's going to make your career great. The thing that's going to make your career great is by getting out there and by doing this stuff. And I can't emphasize enough how important scientific communication is. If you do the research, you have to be able to present it well, and you have to be able to communicate it well in writing. And so, use the time that you have to develop those skills with scientific communication. But I don't think there's a wrong answer to how to go about building this career. Just do it.
That's true. The more things you try, the easiest will be to pick the right one. Thank you, Michelle. Adrienne?
This might be a little bit repetitive, but I think just finding good mentors, and that's gonna find a mentor that can fill that gap that you need if you're and surround yourself with mentors. So not only just one as your PhD advisor, one as your postdoc advisor, but have a network that can support you in different aspects. And I think that's going to open doors to going to conferences. They're going to tell you what conferences to go to for your specific field, right? And they're also going to be ones to help recommend you to other opportunities. And so making that network is really, really important. But I know it's been said already, so I'll just re-emphasize it.
That's because when we talk about mentors, we always think about our director of studies, so our supervisors, but actually there are lots of people that will be happy to be mentoring us. So that's what I've been finding over time, that people are just willing to share their knowledge. So what you have to do is just ask and drop.
And don't forget peers. Peer mentoring is just as important as senior, junior mentoring.
Yeah, you grow in your career with your peers, right? And so meeting and networking with your peers is so important to be able to grow your research program, and collaborate with new people. So definitely.
Thank you, Jean. Bianca.
I guess I will just end with pretty pragmatic tips. Number one is to join our group. So the AI for Women's Health group, because we put on these events for you, and a lot of our talks are really, made accessible for a large audience. So I think this is a really good starting point if you maybe haven't really found out which exact topic you want to focus on, but you're looking for inspiration, or you do have a research idea already, but you're still, figuring it out. So I think that's a good starting place. The other thing is really pragmatic, but it's adding everyone you meet on LinkedIn, including us. I think this is something my students really don't get, or it's not maybe like something that is so obvious to people, but I genuinely think that's the best way to keep yourself updated on what everyone is doing. So just an example, Adrienne was mentioning she's building her lab. She might be recruiting soon. I'm actually recruiting PhDs very soon. And all these opportunities, you only find them once you're kind of in that circle and you're like following people, etc. So I think that's an easy way to get involved. And another tip, which is more to make your life easier, is whenever you're contacting people you don't know via email or via message or whatever, be specific. I get a lot of requests from students who are like, oh, I'm really interested, I want to help. And I'm like, sure, tell me more. Like, how are you going to help? What do you want to do? When are you available? Give me all the details, because otherwise I'm the one who's like hunting down information from you. And I don't know if we're going to be able to work with you, but you're asking me to do so much extra work just to figure out what you can do and what you are interested in. So whenever you're contacting someone new, whether that's for an internship, whether that's for, joining or auditing a course or mentor or whatever, just be very, very specific what you're asking from them, because you take the risk of them not replying, and that would be a shame. So I think that's just 3 very simple tips that everybody here can practice and put into action now. Yeah.
Thank you, Bianca. Yeah, that was amazing. I think that was the right way of closing up the session, with just practical tips on how to get growing in the field. Thanks a lot to, of course, Bianca, Gian, and Michelle for being with us today, and Christine as a extra help in leading this. And thank you everyone who joined today. As Bianca said, we will keep organizing panels and meetings. The next one will likely be in May, but don't forget to add us on LinkedIn so you can get and sign up to the mailing list that Emma has put in the chat so you can receive the regular updates. And with that, I'd like to close the meeting, and thanking you again, Michelle, Adrienne, and Bianca, for sharing your insights with us today. Thanks again, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank